They heard her screaming from behind the locked door. They saw the fear in her eyes through the cracked window. But they still walked away, because it was easier to believe she was lying than to accept the truth, waiting on the other side of that door. The hallway smelled of dust and old paint, the kind that made breathing feel heavier than it should. Sarah stood barefoot on the cold floor, her fists clenched so tightly her nails dug into her palms. "Please," she cried again, her voice hoarse, cracking with desperation. "I need help. I swear something's wrong." The neighbors had gathered outside her apartment, whispering among themselves. Some shook their heads. Others rolled their eyes. "She's always dramatic," one woman muttered. "Last time it was the gas leak that didn't exist," another replied. Sarah pressed her forehead against the locked door, tears slipping down her cheeks. She could hear the ticking sound again, slow, rhythmic, terrifying. Her heart pounded in sync with it. Inside her chest, fear twisted into something deeper, regret. She wondered if she should have stayed silent, if asking for help had only made things worse. "Please, I wouldn't lie about this," she whispered, though no one seemed to be listening anymore. The footsteps began to fade. One by one, people decided she wasn't worth their time. Sarah slid down against the door, her knees giving out beneath her. Alone again, and this time, she wasn't sure how much longer she had. As the voices disappeared, memories flooded her mind, unwanted, relentless. Sarah had learned early that being heard didn't always mean being believed. Growing up, she had cried for help more times than she could count. Each time, someone told her she was exaggerating, imagining things, seeking attention. Now, as an adult, the same words echoed around her like a cruel joke. "Calm down. You're overreacting. It's all in your head." She pressed her hands against her ears, but the ticking grew louder. Her phone lay useless beside her, battery long dead. She thought of her mother, gone too soon, who used to say, "One day, someone will listen." Sarah's throat tightened. "I need someone now," she whispered into the empty room. Outside, the building settled into its usual silence, unaware of the storm raging inside one small apartment. Sarah crawled toward the door again, knocking weakly. "I'm scared," she said softly, her voice breaking. But fear, she was learning, was invisible to those who chose not to see. Downstairs, Marcus hesitated. He had been the last one to leave the hallway. His hand hovered over the stair railing, his mind replaying Sarah's face, pale, frantic, eyes filled with something that didn't look like lies. What if she's telling the truth? He shook his head, trying to silence the thought. He had responsibilities, a long shift ahead, problems of his own. Getting involved was complicated, dangerous. Still, his feet refused to move. He remembered a night years ago when he had needed help and no one came. The memory stung like a fresh wound. Upstairs, a loud thud echoed through the building. Marcus froze. His heart raced. Another sound followed, metal scraping against wood. "That didn't sound normal," he muttered, ignoring the voice of doubt, telling him to walk away. Marcus turned back toward the stairs. Each step upward felt heavier, but clearer. When he reached Sarah's door, he placed his ear against it. Inside, he heard her crying, and beneath it all, that ticking sound. Marcus knocked firmly. "Sarah, it's me. Are you okay?" Her sobs paused. "No," she replied instantly. "Please don't leave. Something's going to happen." His stomach tightened. He looked at the lock, old and rusted, and then at the doorframe, cracked from years of neglect. "Why didn't you open the door earlier?" he asked gently. "I can't," she said, panic rising again. "It jammed. I tried everything." Another loud clank echoed from inside. Marcus stepped back, heart pounding. This wasn't hysteria. This was real. He pulled out his phone and called emergency services, his voice steady but urgent. As he waited, he stayed close to the door, speaking to Sarah constantly, about anything, everything, just to keep her grounded. "You're not alone," he said. For the first time that night, Sarah believed it. She leaned against the door, matching her breathing to his calm voice. Hope flickered inside her, fragile but alive. Whatever was behind that door, at least now, someone was finally listening. The sirens arrived faster than Sarah expected. Red and blue lights flashed through the hallway, painting the walls with urgency. Firefighters assessed the situation quickly, their expressions shifting from doubt to concern as the ticking grew louder. "This could be serious," one of them said. They forced the door open. The moment it swung wide, everything changed. Inside, a faulty gas meter sparked violently, wires exposed, seconds away from disaster. One wrong moment, one more minute of disbelief, and the entire floor could have been gone. Sarah collapsed into tears as firefighters secured the area. Marcus stood frozen, guilt washing over him. They thought she was lying, he realized, and they were wrong. As Sarah was wrapped in a blanket, trembling but alive, she looked up at Marcus. "Thank you for coming back," she whispered. He swallowed hard. "I almost didn't." That truth would haunt him, but it would also change him forever. Sarah sat on the edge of the ambulance, wrapped in a rough gray blanket that smelled faintly of smoke and detergent. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Every few seconds, she glanced back at the open doorway of her apartment, now swarming with firefighters and police officers. The place she had called home felt unfamiliar, almost hostile. A paramedic knelt in front of her. "You're safe now," he said gently. Safe. The word felt strange. Hollow. Marcus stood a few steps away, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. He couldn't meet her eyes. The truth sat heavy inside him. If he hadn't turned back, she might not be sitting here at all. "I kept telling them," Sarah said quietly, her voice barely more than a breath. "I kept saying something was wrong." Marcus nodded slowly, shame burning behind his ribs. "I know. I should have listened sooner." She looked at him then, really looked. There was no anger in her eyes, only exhaustion. "They never listen," she said. "Not until it's almost too late." Those words hit Marcus harder than any accusation could have. Around them, neighbors watched from a distance, their faces pale, their whispers gone. The truth had finally arrived, loud and undeniable. As the ambulance doors closed, Marcus realized something painful and irreversible. Disbelief could be just as dangerous as cruelty. And sometimes survival depended on one person choosing to stop walking away. The next morning, the building felt different, quieter, heavier. Yellow caution tape stretched across Sarah's doorway, a silent reminder of how close everything had come to ending. Neighbors avoided eye contact as they passed Marcus in the hallway. Some looked ashamed, others looked afraid. Sarah was released from the hospital by noon. Physically unharmed, they said, but no one asked about the fear that still clung to her chest like a second heartbeat. Marcus insisted on walking her home. "You shouldn't be alone today," he said. She hesitated, then nodded. Inside his apartment, she sat stiffly on the couch, hands folded in her lap. The silence pressed down on them. "I kept wondering," she finally said. "If something had happened, would anyone have cared?" Marcus swallowed. He had no answer. He remembered every time he'd ignored someone else's pain because it was inconvenient. Easier not to believe. Easier not to act. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "Not just for yesterday. For all of it." Sarah looked at him, eyes glistening. "I don't need apologies," she replied. "I needed belief." That word lingered between them. Belief. Marcus realized then that kindness wasn't always about doing something big. Sometimes it was simply choosing not to doubt someone who was already terrified. News spread quickly. By evening, everyone in the building knew what had almost happened. Conversations changed. Voices softened. Doors stayed open longer. Guilt has a way of doing that, reshaping behavior after the damage is done. Sarah avoided the hallway, staying inside Marcus's apartment while repairs were arranged. She felt exposed, like her fear had been laid bare for everyone to judge. "I hate that they know now," she admitted. "I hate that it took proof." Marcus leaned against the counter, listening, really listening. "They didn't trust your words," he said, "but they should have." She nodded slowly. "People think lying is louder than truth, but real fear is quiet. It hides." That night, Sarah dreamed of locked doors and voices fading away. She woke gasping, heart racing. Marcus was there instantly, offering water, steady presence, no questions. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like she had to explain herself. Outside, sirens wailed somewhere far away. Life moved on. But inside that small apartment, something fragile and important was forming, understanding. Sarah realized healing didn't begin with survival. It began with being believed after the danger had passed. And for Marcus, the lesson was permanent. Ignoring fear doesn't make it disappear. It only makes it louder when it finally breaks free. Days later, Sarah returned to her apartment. The gas meter was replaced, the lock repaired. Everything looked normal again, but nothing felt the same. She stood in the doorway, hesitant. The room held memories of panic she couldn't erase. Marcus watched her struggle. "You don't have to rush," he said. "I know," she replied, "but I can't keep running either." She stepped inside, breathing slowly. The silence no longer felt threatening, but it wasn't comforting yet. Healing, she realized, didn't happen all at once. It arrived in fragments. That evening, a knock came at her door. One of the neighbors stood there, eyes downcast. "I'm sorry," the woman said. "We should have helped." Sarah nodded. "Yes, you should have." The honesty startled them both, but there was no cruelty in her voice, only truth. After the door closed, Sarah leaned against the wall, tears falling freely. Marcus stood beside her, saying nothing, offering what mattered most, presence. She had survived the danger. Now came the harder part, learning to trust the world again. And somewhere deep inside, she made a quiet promise to herself. She would never silence her fear again just to make others comfortable. Weeks passed. The building returned to routine, but Sarah didn't. She spoke up more, asked questions, trusted her instincts. Some people noticed, others didn't. But that no longer mattered as much. Marcus changed too. He checked in on neighbors, paid attention, took fear seriously, especially when it came quietly. One evening, Sarah stood by her window, watching the city lights flicker on. "Do you think people really learn?" she asked. Marcus thought for a moment. "Only if the truth scares them enough." She smiled faintly. "I wish it didn't take almost losing everything." "So do I," he said. They stood there in silence, two people shaped by one moment of belief. Behind a once locked door, a truth had waited patiently. And when it finally opened, it didn't just reveal danger. It revealed how easily compassion is delayed, and how powerful it can be when it finally arrives. Sarah knew the past couldn't be rewritten, but the future could be kinder. And sometimes that was enough. Sarah began volunteering at a small crisis helpline downtown. She didn't tell many people about it. She didn't need praise. She only knew what it felt like to be unheard, and she refused to let someone else sit alone with that fear. Every night, she listened to strangers pour out panic, doubt, and quiet desperation. "I believe you," she told them, often before they even finished explaining. Those words had power. She felt it every time someone exhaled on the other end of the line. Still, when she returned home, the memories waited. The locked door, the fading footsteps, the ticking sound. Healing wasn't linear. Some nights she felt strong. Others, she curled up on the couch, fighting the urge to blame herself for not being louder, clearer, braver. Marcus noticed. He never pushed. He just stayed. "You don't have to save everyone," he reminded her once. "I know," she said softly, "but I couldn't save myself back then." "That's not true," Marcus replied. "You survived. That matters." Sarah stared at her hands, thinking about how survival often looked like weakness from the outside, how fear was mistaken for exaggeration. She realized something painful but freeing. She wasn't responsible for convincing people of the truth. She was only responsible for honoring it. And for the first time, that felt like enough. The building held a safety meeting one evening. Almost everyone attended. Chairs scraped against the floor as neighbors sat uncomfortably close, eyes avoiding Sarah's. She felt their guilt before a single word was spoken. A manager cleared his throat. "We failed," he admitted. "We didn't respond appropriately." Sarah listened quietly. Apologies filled the room. Some sincere, some defensive. When they asked her to speak, her chest tightened. Marcus gave her a small nod. She stood slowly. "I don't need apologies," she said. "I need awareness." The room stilled. "I was scared," she continued. "And fear doesn't always sound logical, but it's real. If you wait for proof before you care, sometimes there's nothing left to save." Silence followed. Heavy, necessary. Later, as people filtered out, a young woman approached Sarah with tears in her eyes. "I've been afraid to say something about my own apartment," she whispered. Sarah held her hands. "Say it anyway." That moment stayed with her. She hadn't just survived something terrible. She had become a reason someone else felt brave enough to speak. Outside, the hallway lights flickered softly. For the first time, Sarah didn't feel like the walls were closing in. They were opening. Marcus struggled with his own reflection. He replayed the moment he almost walked away over and over. The version of himself who chose convenience over compassion haunted him. He started small, checking on people, asking questions, listening fully. One night, he admitted the truth to Sarah. "I still hate myself a little," he said. She looked at him carefully. "Then make sure you never ignore fear again," she replied. He nodded. "I won't." Marcus volunteered too. Community safety programs, awareness campaigns. Not for redemption, but responsibility. He understood now that inaction wasn't neutral. It carried weight, consequences. Sometimes, he wondered how many stories ended badly simply because no one paused long enough to believe. Sarah watched him change with quiet respect. They didn't talk about labels, hero, savior, anything like that. They understood something deeper. People didn't need to be perfect. They needed to be present. On a late evening walk, Sarah stopped outside her old apartment door. "I used to think that door almost killed me," she said. "And now," Marcus asked, "now I think it taught me who listens and who doesn't." She stepped forward without fear. Growth, she realized, often came wrapped in pain. Months later, Sarah slept through the night, for the first time, without waking in panic. Morning light filled her apartment gently, not harshly. The ticking was gone. The silence felt earned. She brewed coffee, humming softly. Healing didn't announce itself. It arrived quietly. Marcus stopped by with groceries, as usual. "You seem lighter," he said. "I am," she replied. "Not because I forgot, but because I forgave myself." That mattered. She had spent too long wondering what she did wrong, instead of recognizing what others refused to do right. At the helpline, she trained new volunteers. Her favorite lesson was simple: listen first. Fear doesn't need interrogation. It needs compassion. One call stayed with her. A woman locked in a bathroom, unsure if she was in danger. Sarah believed her instantly. Help arrived in time. Afterward, Sarah sat quietly, hands trembling, not from fear, but gratitude. Somewhere along the way, her story had transformed. It no longer ended at the door that wouldn't open. It continued beyond it, into rooms filled with understanding. Pain hadn't disappeared. It had purpose now. And purpose, she learned, was one of the strongest forms of healing. On the anniversary of the incident, Sarah stood in the hallway where it all began. The walls were repainted. The air smelled clean. Ordinary. Marcus stood beside her. "I still hear your voice sometimes," he admitted, "asking for help." She nodded. I still remember thinking no one would come. They stood in silence, honoring the moment without reliving it. I'm glad you didn't give up, Marcus said. So am I, she replied. Sarah understood now that survival wasn't just about escaping danger. It was about reclaiming trust in herself, in her voice, in humanity. She placed her hand on the door gently, then turned away without hesitation. The past no longer held her. What remained was clarity. Belief saves lives. Doubt delays it. And sometimes, the difference between tragedy and hope is one person choosing to listen before it's too late. Sarah no longer jumped at sudden noises, but some evenings still carried echoes of that night. Healing hadn't erased fear. It had taught her how to stand beside it without shrinking. She sat at her desk, reading a letter from a helpline, a handwritten thank you from someone who said her voice had been the reason they stayed alive one more night. She pressed the paper to her chest, breathing deeply. Marcus watched quietly from the doorway. You changed lives, he said. So did you, Sarah replied. He shook his head. I almost didn't. But you did, she said firmly. That's what matters now. They had learned something together. Regret could either rot the soul or rebuild it. Marcus had chosen the harder path. Accountability, awareness, growth. Later, Sarah walked past her building's entrance without fear. The doors opened smoothly. No resistance. No panic. She realized something powerful. The door that once trapped her had become a symbol, not of danger, but of truth revealed. Life didn't promise safety. It promised moments where choices mattered. And sometimes, the bravest thing a person could do wasn't to save someone, but to believe them before it was too late. A community workshop was organized months later, about safety, awareness, and listening without judgment. Sarah was invited to speak. She hesitated, nerves tightening her chest. Marcus squeezed her hand. They need to hear you. Standing at the front of the room, Sarah saw familiar faces. Some looked ashamed, others hopeful. I'm not here to blame, she began. I'm here to remind you. Fear doesn't always make sense, but it's always real. The room listened, truly listened. She described the loneliness of not being believed, the danger of dismissal, the quiet damage of doubt. When she finished, the silence wasn't awkward, it was reflective. Afterward, people approached her one by one. Stories poured out. Regrets, confessions, gratitude. Sarah realized her voice no longer trembled. She wasn't asking to be heard anymore. She was teaching others how to listen. That night, she stood outside under the city lights, feeling grounded. The past no longer controlled her. Her pain had become purpose, and her truth, once ignored, now created ripples of compassion she never imagined possible. Marcus changed jobs, choosing community work over comfort. He spoke openly about the cost of indifference. Doing nothing is still a choice, he often said. Sarah admired that honesty. Growth wasn't loud, it was consistent. One evening, they walked together through the hallway where everything began. New neighbors laughed softly behind closed doors. Life continued. Do you ever wish it never happened? Marcus asked. Sarah thought carefully. I wish it hadn't hurt, she said, but I don't wish it away. Because without it, she wouldn't have found her strength. Without it, she wouldn't have learned the difference between hearing and believing. They stopped at the stairs. Some doors, Sarah said quietly, only open after the truth is ignored long enough to scream. Marcus nodded. They parted ways that night with peace, not closure, but understanding. Life would test them again. It always does. But they knew now. Compassion must arrive before proof. And belief, when given freely, can change outcomes forever. Time softened the sharpest edges of memory, but it never erased the lesson. Sarah kept a small sign above her desk at the helpline. Listen first. It wasn't advice. It was survival wisdom. Calls came in daily. Fear took many forms. Some loud, some barely audible. Sarah treated each one with the same respect she had once been denied. One night, after a particularly difficult call, she sat alone, eyes closed, breathing slowly. She wasn't broken anymore, but she was changed, and that was okay. Across the city, Marcus locked up a community center. Exhausted but fulfilled, he thought about how easily lives slipped through cracks created by doubt. He promised himself never to step aside again. Somewhere between regret and responsibility, he had found purpose. They hadn't saved the world, but they had saved moments. And sometimes that was everything. Sarah stood in front of her door one last time, not because she feared it, but because she no longer did. She opened it easily and stepped forward. No hesitation, no panic, only quiet strength. The world hadn't become kinder overnight, but she had become braver. And bravery, she knew, often began with being believed. As she walked into the light, she carried one truth with her. Every voice matters. Every fear deserves attention. And sometimes, the difference between tragedy and hope is someone choosing to listen before the door finally opens. Some truths whisper before they scream. Some fears arrive quietly, hoping to be believed. If this story touched your heart, remember, listening can save lives. Like, subscribe, and join our Heart Angels family, where every voice matters.